during the years when Joe became, in part, a speed-driven collagist, he would often bring papers and scissors with him to dinner, and smoking a cigarette, having a drink, he'd start to snip away. He was working that rapidly, then there seemed nothing about this that couldn't fit in our usual circumstance. Joe could get away with pretty much anything because he didn't try to get away with anything. I remember one night he brought a television to dinner and said, "There's going to be a good program on the CIA that I'd like to watch. Do you mind?" Well, he was right. It was good. It was funny. And it was totally Joe to do something as consciously unself-conscious, I guess, as bring a television to dinner. I knew Joe's work before I knew Joe. I knew the book covers. I knew the collaborations. I had copies of I Remember. Louis Warsh had published this, and he'd given them to me. It's hard to say how a friend influences a friend. I think probably the greatest lesson I took from Joe, and I couldn't have said it then, was that taste is a meaningless thing. Good taste is a tyranny. Bad taste often is the best taste because it is unconventional, because it is yours if you have the courage to commit yourself to it. So certainly he, in his presence, in his work, you can't say Joe taught because he was far too, he was not pretentious in that way. He had nothing to do with lessons, but his work could not help but broadcasting the sense of do what you have to do, go your own way, be fearless, which does not mean being loud, obnoxious, which does not mean being rebellious in some standard way. I think that for all of us, he, along with Frank O'Hara, with Jimmy Schuyler, with John Ashbery in his own way, opened the door. Those of us who could see that door was open to our own lives, to what mattered to us, and that this could be the source of our art. We exchanged letters, but this was not a letter-writing friendship. Although Joe wrote wonderful letters, in part because they were so physically wonderful. They were written on lined paper, like a schoolboy would buy, with felt-tip markers, and they were printed in a block printing that is his and his alone, Joe Brainard's signature, or his address to you on an envelope, is instantly his. I ought to say that I'm speaking in Boston, in my house, 9 Columbus Square, which is only about a block from where Joe lived during his time in Boston, which was extremely lonely and was between one stay in New York and his lifetime commitment to New York. The apartment building's still there. I've never been in it. We did walk by it once when he came up here to read at Jimmy Schuyler's memorial. So he did have a Boston connection. Among things he said about that connection was that he was so broke that he went to the big sand-filled urns, ashtrays, in front of the Museum of Fine Arts and took out the butts and straightened them out. Joe was a passionate smoker who once famously wrote a note to himself, "Smoke more." He was a terrible cook in a very winning way. Potato salad Brainard was a dish we had every summer at Kenward's. It was potato salad that was so heavily doused with paprika and curry that you could hardly see the potatoes. He would make meals. He and Ken would often hand me over to Father's Day, a special Father's Day dinner for me, and they would always say, "Please don't tell Beverly what he served you." I knew him during the Dr. Pepper years, when he always seemed to have a Dr. Pepper. He had candy that he always let the kids have. I can remember a series of paintings he was doing where he was looking out his Green Street loft window. It would often be a winter twilight, suffused with that kind of reddishness that you get in New York. It's partially from the taillights of cars. It's definitely a tone. And I saw those pictures, and I commented on one or two of them that I'd like this, I'd like that. And he said, well, it just wasn't good enough. It just wasn't good enough for him. Did all of that doesn't mean that his faith in his work wouldn't have been restored. I don't know of an artist of any quality who doesn't go through periods of doubt, and doubt's one of the spurs to produce what you do. If Joe felt he wasn't good enough, then by his standards, I guess he wasn't. To step away at that moment, I think takes courage. Many artists continue far, far after they should have dropped the brush or put the pen down, because it's so important to their sense of identity. Joe went from being Joe Brainard, this magnificently fecund artist, to being Joe Brainard, the guy who wasn't working. Both of them, or wasn't working in a public way, both of them seemed true identities. And Joe, in his unconventional way, challenges the whole notion of what an artist is. Suppose your work is only your first 20 years, and you get it, and you know it, and you stop. Well, you're supposed to be an artist all your life. Well, Joe made it clear, in his life at least, in his career, that art isn't like climbing the stairs. You don't necessarily, in some American way, just progress and get better and better and better until you reach this apotheosis. If he came to the conclusion that he wasn't good enough, I find that a conclusion worthy of respect. It is the totality of Joe's work that is Joe. That said, I think that perhaps the most remarkable thing he did is I Remember. I don't know of a poet who knows that book, or a writer who hasn't taught that book and hasn't found that it really sets people off, students off. It is, without saying so, everybody's autobiography. Here's a man, we both were born in 1942. He grows up gay in Tulsa, Oklahoma, moves to New York. The outward facts of our lives couldn't be any more different. But you start to read a page or two pages of that, and you begin to remember your own life. It is a spur to memory. And he did the simplest things of all. Just, I remember this. I remember that. What a bold thing that seems to be. So much more bold, so much bolder than heavyweight, supposedly mechanical literary productions. He had the courage in that book to be himself, and that allows the reader of it to for it to become your autobiography, because it's as if you read Joe and you're reading it simultaneously with your own life, even if you're 25 years younger and don't know what a jujube is, or have only a dim memory of some of the things he's talking about. You supply your own, because the categories, the experience is so totally real, unabashed, and American. No literary device, except the simplest one of the list, nothing stands between that book and its reader. I think that's why it's lived so long. I think that's why the Library of America will publish is going to republish it. I think when Paul Auster calls it a masterpiece, he's not wrong.